The sun was setting over the quiet hills of Montana, bleeding orange and gold into the dusty plains. Thomas McAllister, a rugged, soft-spoken rancher in his early 40s, rode home with more than just a saddlebag on his horse that evening. He carried the weight of a decision that would change his life forever. She was only 12. Thin, bruised, and silent, the girl had stood beside her drunk, staggering father in the back of a dim tavern, staring at the floor. The man had slurred something about needing whiskey more than mouths to feed, and offered her for a price that made Thomas's stomach turn. It was wrong. It was cruel. But it was the world they lived in, where desperate men made desperate choices, and the innocent paid the price. He didn't think. He reached for his wallet, shoved the man a wad of cash, and took the girl by the hand. She didn't speak. Not once on the ride home. That night, she sat stiffly by the fireplace in Thomas's cabin, eyes darting at every sound, flinching at every movement. Thomas, who lived alone since the death of his wife years ago, made her a bowl of warm stew, laid a blanket on the couch, and tried not to scare her more than she already was. He asked her name. No answer. He asked if she was cold. Nothing. That's when he noticed, she never looked at his face when he spoke. Always slightly to the side, her expression blank. She was deaf. Or so he believed. The following days passed with cautious silence. Thomas worked the ranch and left her space, gently offering food, clothes, and comfort. She stayed quiet, never speaking, never gesturing. At night, she would stare out the window, eyes glimmering with something between sadness and fear. He started calling her Annie. She didn't object. Weeks turned into months. Annie grew stronger, healthier. Her bruises faded, but her silence remained. Still, Thomas never pushed. Instead, he created a quiet rhythm of kindness, whittling small wooden toys for her, pointing at things with a smile to name them, treating her not like a burden, but a blessing. And slowly, something shifted. One morning, Thomas dropped a plate in the kitchen. It shattered. Annie flinched. She turned her head toward the sound. He froze. His heart pounded. Annie, he said softly, testing. Did you hear that? She didn't respond, but her eyes, those wide, scared eyes, locked onto his with a flicker of guilt. He walked slowly toward her. Annie, you can hear me, can't you? Tears welled up in her eyes. Then, in the quietest, trembling whisper, she spoke for the first time. Please, don't send me back. Thomas sank to his knees. Oh, sweetheart, he said, choking back emotion. I would never. You're safe here. You always will be. That was the day everything changed. Annie wasn't deaf. She had pretended to be, out of fear. Her father used to beat her when she cried or spoke. Staying silent had become survival. Thomas realized that the scars she carried weren't just on her skin, they ran deep into her soul. Helping her heal wasn't easy. She had nightmares. She flinched at loud voices. When strangers visited the ranch, she would disappear for hours. Thomas stayed patient. He taught her to ride a horse, how to tend the animals, how to plant vegetables. They would sit on the porch at night, watching the stars, and she would slowly open up, sharing memories of her mother before she died, the darkness that followed, and her fear that no one would ever love her again. Thomas wasn't her father, but he became something just as powerful, her protector, her teacher, and eventually, her family. One winter evening, as snow fell gently outside the cabin window, Annie handed him a crumpled drawing. It was of a small house, a horse, a man with a cowboy hat, and a little girl smiling. Beside him, he looked at her, stunned. That's us, she said softly. You're my home. Tears burned in his eyes as he pulled her into a hug. But not every chapter of their story was peaceful. When Annie turned 15, her biological father returned. He had sobered up, somewhat, and learned of her whereabouts. Claiming paternal rights, he tried to take her back. Thomas was devastated. The law was murky, and the town officials debated what to do. Annie, terrified, spoke before them all. She told her story, of the abuse, the beatings, the fear. She told them how Thomas had never raised his voice, never laid a hand, but gave her a chance to live and breathe and be loved. It was her voice, strong and trembling, that moved the town. The court ruled in her favor. Thomas legally adopted Annie that spring. And for the first time, she carried his name with pride. Years passed. Annie grew into a confident, kind young woman. She helped other girls who had faced trauma. She started a program for children in need at the local school, using her story to inspire others. And through it all, Thomas remained her constant. At her high school graduation, Annie stood on stage and gave a speech that silenced the crowd. "I was once a girl no one wanted. Bought like an object, forgotten like trash. But one man, one quiet, lonely rancher, saw me as human. He gave me dignity when I had none. And that saved my life." She looked at him from the stage, her eyes full of love. "I used to be afraid of the world," she said. "Now I want to change it. Because he changed mine." The crowd stood in applause. And Thomas, sitting in the back of the room, wiped a tear from his weathered cheek, his heart fuller than it had ever been. Because sometimes, family isn't made by blood. It's made by choice. And love. And the courage to hear someone's silence, and answer it with hope.